In this Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to show you how to go from this to adding this dreamy morning glow effect to your bird photography. And it takes less than 10 minutes. If you like bird watching and bird photography, be sure to subscribe and let's get into the tutorial. Alright, so the first thing that we have to do is actually separate the foreground and the background in this image. It's going to be very difficult to get that dreamy look if we're editing both of the foreground and the background at the same time. So first, I'll just remove this branch. I have a link in the description for a full tutorial on how to remove branches from your bird photography in Photoshop. Now, to remove the background and the foreground, there are a bunch of different ways to do this. What I'm going to do is the old-fashioned way using the pen tool. This is just so I get the best possible result. You're just going to follow the outline of the foreground here. So this here is me selecting the foreground, and it is a lot quicker to just click on remove background, but you really don't get that very clean, crisp edges, which is quite important for us to get this morning glow effect. And now when you are done with the selection, you just want to make sure you click on the starting point. So now that you have this selection, what you're going to do is right click and you're going to do make selection. So if you type 0 here, it's going to be a clean cut. So you're going to get that crisp edge. Or if you do something like 1 or 2, then you're going to get a bit of feathering on the outside, just meaning you get a slight bit of blur on the borders here. So I'm going to do 1 and click OK. And now to separate this from the background, what I'm going to do is click on this icon here. So now I have the foreground here. And because we didn't do simply a copy and paste, and instead we did a mask, we can actually go back and edit. So I can do this and draw it back in, or I can remove even more. So I can see I missed a bit of the background here. So I'll simply draw this in, right click, make selection, and delete. So you want to make sure when you're selecting the foreground here that you're using the mask. That way you can always edit it and fix any of those small mistakes. So we now have the foreground and we have the background layer. So what we're going to do is hold down Command on the keyboard and click on your mask. So this now selects this area. Now, whilst being on the background layer, we are going to click on Window, we are going to click on the taskbar, and here what I'll do is remove bird and branch. So I'm just going to tell it to remove this, and then click on Generate. And as you can see, Photoshop generates 3 options for me, so I'll click on this one here, I'll do number 3, and I can simply hide this bar. So now I have this background and this foreground separated. So if I move this about, you can see that these are 2 separate layers. So what I'm going to do here is combine these 2 layers here, the background. So I'll hold down Shift so I have both of these selected, and I'll right click and I will do Merge Layers. So this now is my background. And what I can do is clean up any of the small stuff. So I'll use this tool here, the spot healing brush. I have a smudge here. So I'll just make it slightly cleaner like that. All right, so this is the first step and it's really important. We have the foreground and the background as separate layers. All right, part 2. What we're going to do here is create a new layer in between these 2 here. And what we're going to do is click on this here, the gradient tool. And as you can see, one of these options here is going from a full color to a full transparent color. So I'll select this one, and by default, it goes from red to transparent. So I have these settings here. If you're not seeing these settings, you're going to click on Window, and here you're going to click on Properties. Now, I'm going to want to change these settings. So the first thing I want to change is the color red. So I'll double click on one of these circles, and then this here will appear. So I'm going to select white, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this end. The reason we're doing that is we don't want it going from white to slightly red, so we want to ensure that it's going from white to white, even if this here is transparent. Now, right now, by default, I have it on linear. I want to change it to this here, the radial gradient. So when I'm creating a gradient, I'm creating it in a circle where it's going from white, so this color, to the edge here, which is the transparent white. So now what I want to do is look at my image and understand where, even if it's very small, even if it's very slight, I want to understand where was the sun when I took this photo. So if I look closely here, I can see the light is hitting here and it's hitting the top of the bird's head. So as you can see here, it's a lot darker and it's darker over here. So the light is probably around somewhere up here. So when I'm drawing in the light, I'll have it coming from that direction. So I'll draw it in there and I'll make it reasonably large. So now we have that. Now, as you can see, it looks quite a bit overwhelming. So we can turn this down by lowering the opacity here. And now it looks just a bit more natural. Now for the next step here, what I'm going to do is actually hide that gradient that we just created. And we're going to play with the background here. So I'm going to right click on the background layer and I'm going to click on Convert to Smart Object. The reason I'm going to do that is so I can go back and edit any changes that I do. And I think, you know what, that might not have been the exact setting that I wanted. And now with this selected, I'm going to click on filter and I'm going to click on camera raw filter. So now here I can edit the settings for the background. So what I'll do is just drag up this exposure here. To get that dreamy look, you really want a reasonably bright background. And I'm also going to drag up the contrast here, again giving it that dreamy look. I'll drag up the highlights as well, and I'll do the same thing here for the whites. I'll just drag that up there. So now you can see it just looks a bit more dreamy. And what we can do as well to get that effect is to use this effect here. And what we're going to do is drag down the clarity, which just means we lose a bit of that focus, which is what we want. And what you can do is drag down the haze. And then I'll click on OK. So now because we have the smart filters, I can turn this on and off so you can see without the smart filter and with the smart filter applied. And now what I'll do is click here to add the gradient back, and I might just decrease that a bit more like that. Now what I want to do here is change the color ever so slightly. So right now it's very green. I took this photo, by the way, in Glue Pot Reserve in South Australia. If you find birdwatching interesting, I have a bunch of vlogs on this channel where I explore different regions of South Australia, so be sure to check them out on the channel. But what I want to do here to get that morning glow effect is actually change this from a greenish color to more of a red hue. So with the background selected, I'm going to click on Image and I'm going to click on Adjustments. And here what I'll do is play with the color balance. And what I'll do is slightly drag this to red here and maybe a bit more like that. And I will slightly drag it to magenta like that. All right, so now we have more of a warm glow as well. So if I show without and with, as you can see, it's very, very small, but it does make a difference. Now, the next thing we want to do is ensure that the foreground here is actually matching, because right now it feels not too aligned. So what I'm going to do here with the foreground is Command J, so basically just duplicating this layer. And I am going to right click on this new one and convert to smart object. Then I can edit anything if I need to. So with this layer selected, I will click on filter and here I will do camera raw filter. So for this, what I'll do is just drag up the highlights a bit and I want to remove a bit of the shadows here. So as you can see here, the shadow is quite strong. So I'll just drag the shadow up here, which just means it's easier to see that. Now you might not want to go overboard with this, but using the texture here, you can say how textured the image is. So if I just drag this maybe about here, that looks decent. And I'll scroll down here and do the same thing with sharpening. I like to increase this just a bit, not too much, or it might look unrealistic and a bit too edited. So now with this, I will click on OK. Now there's one more setting that you can do with the background to give it that extra bit of haze. So what we're going to do is Command J on the background here. And we are going to do filter. So basically that just duplicates this layer here. As you can see, it says background copy. And what we're going to do here is filter, blur, and do, whoops, I'll just move this. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And this here we are just going to have as much as possible. Now I don't want this on the entire image as it looks a bit fake. So what I'm going to do is create a mask for this background. So the reason we've duplicated it is that I still want this here where there's just a bit more detail, but this duplicate here with that bit of blur, I'm going to click here on the mask tool and I'm going to change this here to a black and white. The reason we're doing that is it's going to tell Photoshop, I want this area to be fully visible and the other end of it to not be visible at all. So what I'll do to show you is hide this background here and now just draw this in. So as you can see here, it is hiding this area and it is still showing this here. So it's going from the black gradient to the white gradient here. So now what I want to do is draw in the area where I want the most amount of haze and the least amount of haze. And I think it makes the most amount of sense to have the most haze around this bird here. So what I'll do is draw it in. And as you can see, it's flipped it. And instead of going here and changing these colors, instead what I'll do is just simply click on reverse. So now it is reversing that. So here I can now draw in where I want the most amount of haze, just like that. And now what I'll do is click on the original background once again. Now, as you can see, it is a very small difference here, but it does add just a bit more glow. So now we've added a really natural morning glow effect to this photo. This is the original, and this is what it's turned into. If you're interested in watching a bird watching vlog, then click on this one here where I go to a pond and try to see 30 different species in only 2 hours. If not, I have a very useful Photoshop tutorial. Click on this one here on how to remove branches in Photoshop in only a few clicks.